Interns here at ASPE, and today we're joined by Kim Beazley, who's going to talk with us about the US elections.
Donald Trump has faced vociferous criticism in response to his comments regarding the fallen American soldier in Iraq and his comments regarding the use of the Second Amendment to thwart Hillary Clinton that many have perceived as a threat of assassination against her. Some have thought that this may be signifying that Trump is going to begin pulling out of the race. Do you think that the tide has finally turned against Donald Trump?
Well, it's very difficult to tell, except that one has recourse to polls. And at least at this point of time, the polling says he is not going to win. And he's been out there saying things like the system's rigged against me, which is what he was sort of saying at the beginning of the Republican process as well. So that's it's a favourite ploy of his when he wants to give himself a bit of space to contemplate a future course of action. Somehow I don't think he will. I think his ego keeps him in there, keeps him directed. He understands this, and that is that he can say almost anything, including subtly encouraging folk to contemplate assassinating Hillary Clinton, without it actually disturbing the pattern of his support amongst white working class Americans. Now, that white working class Americans were sufficient to take him to the Republican nomination. They're not sufficient to take him further than that. There are women, of course, are the majority of the electorate. There's all the ethnic communities. When Hillary's husband, Bill, was elected president for the first time, 87% of the electorate was white. In this election, the figure will be less than 70%. So that's a big change. And Trump is not really positioned to do anything other than try to encourage the area where he already has support, that's amongst white working class men, to actually turn out and vote in higher numbers than they ever have before. But even if that happens, unless he starts to penetrate to a higher level of support with some of the other groups of the American electorate, he's not going to win. But pulling out, no, I think he stays in.
Well, despite Clinton's extensive qualifications and her staunch advocacy of social causes such as women and children's rights, her campaign has been shrouded in negativity, including from loyal Democrat supporters. What do you think underlies this resentment?
Look, I think that one of the tricks in contemporary politics is to work out how to define your opponent. And her opponents in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party have been busily defining her for the last 18 months. Some of them actually believe their propaganda. So the utter baloney, I'd use a more strong term than that, of her alleged somehow or other culpability in the Benghazi tragedy which occurred. Absolute rubbish. It is rubbish in detail. It is rubbish in nuance. It is rubbish from the ground up. But the Republicans, including respectable foreign policy experts, have been persisting in that nonsense. Then there's her own goal. And that own goal, of course, was to utilise a non-State Department server, doing the same thing that had previously been done by Karl Rove and two of her other predecessors, but who, even though they had done it previously, they got away with it primarily because the rules had not changed. The rules changed at Hillary's time, so it was a very bad mistake, but a crime, a major threat to American security, a load of nonsense. But it's stuck. And it sort of jibes with a public narrative about the Clintons, that they take advantage of things, that they're economical with the truth and all that sort of thing. So she has been defined into a position of difficulty. Strange when you think it, though. Before she determined that she would pursue the presidency, she was superbly well supported by the American people. 70% approval ratings. Fine words said about her by Republicans in the Senate and the House. and they were quite effusive, and that produced a really strong public support. But what you see is 18 months of heavy definition. And it's the drum roll, the repetitive aspect of the Trump campaign. Over the top, she's a criminal, she's a cheat, she's a liar, she should be jailed. And a few of them, she should be shot. And now Trump is joining, albeit in a nuanced way, that particular proposition. One shoots her because she's the devil. This is the most vicious campaign of denigration that I have ever seen, and I've seen a few.
Yeah. So similarly, this election cycle has seen the rise of non-traditional candidates like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump that have kind of fed off this growing discontent among the American people with the political establishment and what they call political elites. Do you see that this trend continuing on into further elections, or is this kind of a one-off situation?
It's broader and deeper than that. This is a class thing in the first instance, even more than it is some public dismay with the elite. The question is why? What you see at the moment, and it really does strike me as extraordinary, that irrespective of whether or not Trump wins, a majority of white Americans are going to vote for him. Now this is amazing. This is if you're looking at it ethnically, this is the group which has supported American internationalism since World War II. And here they are supporting a candidate who is the absolute polar opposite in the stance he is taking of everything that the US has stood for. He's a candidate running so far to the left of Hillary Clinton and Sanders, except on racial issues, which is a big exception. But except on racial issues, so far to the left of Sanders that it makes it even more extraordinary that the community which has been the support base of American internationalism should be supporting a mountebank like this. And so that's noteworthy. Why? Well, it's basically because of the collapse in self-esteem and income and living circumstances of middle-class Americans. They haven't had a real wage rise for 30 years. And we have had in that time, with that group of people, an increase in income of 2.5 times. Back in 1983, the average family was worth about $79,000. That got up to about $140,000 before the crash. Since the crash, it's back to $80,000. Now, this is cataclysmic. And then on top of that, you've had, particularly the males, see every view they've had socially trashed. And then you come to the ultimate insult, and you've got your tax money going to folks, some of whom might be illegal, some of whom are poor, some of whom don't work, or to provide the bonuses for the thieves that presided over, and the incompetence that presided over the financial collapse. So you add all of that together, and that makes up the Trump base and a broader level of support. A different sort of support for Bernie Sanders. That's not his people. Bernie Sanders' people are kids and ideological liberals. About 20% of the white community are ideological liberals. Now, they could come from anywhere. They might be workers, they might, more likely, they'll be professors and lawyers and so on, who take a liberal stand. And they voted overwhelmingly for Bernie, and the kids, new voters, not committed, voted overwhelmingly for him. They found that his message inspirational. Hillary was saved, better than saved, actually. She won quite easily. She won quite easily because she got the white working class vote. That small remnant of it still voted with the Democrats. That is because that small remnant tends to be members of trade unions. They supported her, and then she got the ethnic communities, large now, but mainly in the Democratic base, Hispanics, African Americans, Asians, and so on. That gave her the numbers over Sanders. So one can note that some levels of similarity in identification of objectionable elites, objectionable practices between the Sanders folk and the folk supporting Trump, but they're very different people.
Do you think that Bernie Sanders has pushed the Democratic Party to the left? Or do you think that this is kind of a this election trend?
Yes, he has. Hillary has been forced to trend towards the left, particularly on things like trade policy, in order to ensure that not so much that she beats Sanders, she's going to beat Sanders, but so that Sanders people vote for her. Because it's critical that they come out and vote for her. Sanders has endorsed her, but there's some evidence that the Sanders folk are less than happy with that. But after the convention, I think she went up from being somewhere around 75% of Sanders supporters saying they'd vote for her against Trump. I think that went up to about 88% after the conventions. Once you're up at about that level, it pretty well means that your opponent in the primary supporters are going to be with you.
Donald Trump has been especially critical of the United States' global network of alliances, framing them primarily in economic or cost-benefit terms. Should he be elected president, how do you see the ANZUS alliance changing?
Look, he's got a poor businessman's view of how you conduct relationships. And basically it's transactional. That there is no history. There is no underlying philosophy. There are no themes that sort of give coherence to a position. There's no long-term strategy. There's no big geopolitical picture. There's just exchange. So he is saying about the alliances several things. One, he's saying that folk aren't doing enough. Well, in some cases that's true, they're not. They will be after this because if he wins, then the American guarantee will collapse and they better do it. The second thing is that they're not buyable things. So the folk who are, if you like, most active in purchasing American support are two of those he's criticised. The South Koreans and the Japanese put a lot of money into the American presence in their countries. In addition to that, they spend a lot on defence. And you can't fault them on any of the fronts that Trump talks about. Europeans, a little more problematic. I notice he hasn't given us a Guernsey at any point in time. We've avoided his sabre. But basically, what he has had to say has probably already sufficiently collapsed alliance confidence in him that folk will be preparing, if he's elected, other arrangements.
So Australia and the United States have long had a very productive security relationship that in both East Asia and globally. What are some of the areas of the alliance that you think could be improved upon or broadened?
Yeah, I wouldn't look at it in the terms of improving upon or broadening, just look at what is. And certainly since the days when I was Defence Minister, the alliance has been transformed. It's vastly more intense now than it was then. That is basically driven by technology, and that is at one level, and that is that the kit that the Americans provide, the capacities of their intelligence systems, all of these things now fit into a frame vital for Australia. We're going to maintain a technological edge in a region where there's an arms race now. Basically, it'll be American kit that we purchase that provides that. Then there's in the intelligence area. The joint facilities, our role used to be just to assure ourselves we knew what was going on. Now the joint facilities are integrated into our order of battle. Intelligence order of battle, obviously, but also into the operations of our soldiers in the field. So we've got a situation here where on those two fronts alone, we can't replicate what the Americans will do. What they'll ask us for in the future, and this I think applies more in the terms of the election of Hillary, because God knows where we'll be if Trump is the guy who gets elected. more and more the Americans are looking at what one might describe as integration. They have a huge task ahead of them in providing resources for their financial resources for their new weapon systems, their new creations. And they're cutting back. They have to cut back in other areas. Congress is very bad with them, won't let them do the sensible things they need to do about old-fashioned kit. But nevertheless, that's the reality. So for argument's sake, here in the Pacific, the Marine Corps identifies the need for 5 flat tops, but they've only got 3. So guess who they'll look to for the other 2? And there'll be other examples. That's a spectacular one, but there'll be other examples like that. So that's where I think the alliance is going, given the normal course of events.
Fantastic.
Both candidates have expressed their opposition to the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiated by the Obama administration. Could this election spell the end of that trade deal?
Could if Trump's elected, yeah.
Hillary?
If Hillary's elected, one of 2 things. It could go through in the lame duck session. Now, a lot of political leaders have said that that's not so, but they're foxing to keep it quiet. I think that that could well happen if Hillary's elected. If Hillary's elected and that doesn't happen, I think you might, after an initial sort of quiet period and gnashing of the teeth and wailing, gradually, slowly, people will come back to see if there's anything more they can give the Americans. That's not easy, because the TPP is massively weighted in favour of the US. That is simply because the US has already, in a sense, given it the office. The US has opened its borders to most of the signatories for pretty low tariff entry into the United States. It has not been the case that they have reciprocated to this point, and they do in this in the TPP arrangement. And then there's all sorts of things about American intellectual property protection, protection of e-commerce, all these sorts of rules being put in place are all very much in favour of American commerce. So I think that Hillary would bring it back into operation. Trump just does not believe in trade deals at all. If he believes in any deal, it's one he negotiates on a bilateral basis. He absolutely opposes multilateral deals and the WTO, but would contemplate, sitting down and doing it. This is his businessman's approach, doing a one-to-one deal with some other country. So that's what Trump will be trying to push the system towards. In the meantime, the global economy will collapse.
Love your positivity.
Do you see the possibility of China joining the TPP ever coming to fruition?
Well, it will, if it ever comes to fruition. So if the TPP, say, were to be ratified by Congress this year, I'd think within a couple of years the Chinese would be starting to try to negotiate entry. That is unless the reform movement in China completely collapses. So we don't really know what Xi is up to. Now, Xi has got there as a reformer, he is seen as a modernist, but so far most of what he's done has been basically, back protection for himself. And, good anti-corruption campaigns, everybody likes to see that. Problem is it a real one, or is it just his opponents?
Yeah.
Or his opponents' supporters? I mean, it's very hard to measure that. But he does not actually seem to be likely to drive major reform. If, however, he decides to, then, I think that probably 2 or 3 years there'd be a Chinese interest.
Thank you very much for your time, Kim, and thank you all for watching.